How many wise men visited Jesus? 3, right? That's what the Christmas cards show. 3 robed figures on camels, silhouetted against a star-filled sky, approaching a humble manger. The image is burned into our cultural memory. Ceramic figurines on mantles, children in bathrobes at church pageants, greeting cards stacked beside the fireplace. Here's the twist. The Bible never says there were 3. Open Matthew chapter 2. Read it yourself. You'll find wise men from the east. Plural, certainly, but no number. We assume 3 because of the 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. For all we know, there could have been 2, or 12, or an entire caravan of 50. And while we're questioning assumptions, let's tackle another one. These visitors weren't kings. The beloved carol says, "We 3 kings," but Matthew uses a different word entirely: Magi. Magi, not just a fancy term for wise men, a specific title. These were members of an ancient Persian priestly caste, astronomers who charted the movements of planets, scholars who interpreted dreams, advisors who whispered counsel into the ears of emperors. In the Persian Empire, Rome's great rival to the east, the Magi wielded serious political influence. Picture the scene. A delegation of powerful Persian priest astronomers arrives in Jerusalem. Dust from the desert still clings to their robes. They approach King Herod's court and ask a single question: where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? That's not a casual inquiry. That's a political earthquake. What fascinates me is this. How did Persian priests know to look for a Jewish king? Why would they care? What compelled them to travel hundreds of miles across harsh desert terrain to find a baby born in an obscure corner of the Roman Empire? The answers take us deeper than any nativity scene. They reach back centuries, to a Jewish exile named Daniel, to ancient prophecies, to a star that somehow told these foreign scholars that someone extraordinary had arrived. Over the next few minutes, we're going to unwrap who the Magi really were. Not the sanitized Christmas card version. The real story, grounded in scripture and history. I think you'll discover it's far more fascinating than the version we grew up with. Let's dig in. To understand the Magi, I need to take you back about 600 years before Jesus was born. The year is 605 BC. Babylon has just conquered Jerusalem. Among the captives dragged east in chains is a young Jewish nobleman named Daniel. You might know him from the Lion's Den story. But Daniel was more than a survivor of hungry lions. He rose to become one of the most powerful officials in the Babylonian Empire, and later, the Persian Empire that conquered it. Here's where it gets interesting for our story. Daniel was appointed chief of the Magi. I'm not making this up. Daniel 5 verse 11 tells us he was made chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. The Hebrew word used there? It's the same root as Magi. This Jewish prophet became the leader of the very priestly caste that would, centuries later, seek out Jesus. Think about what that means. Daniel would have taught these Persian priests. He would have shared Jewish scriptures with them. He would have told them about the prophecies, including the ones about a coming king. I want to show you something. Numbers 2400 hours 17 contains a prophecy that would have caught their attention. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. A star, a king. From the Jewish people, the Magi were astronomers. They watched the heavens with meticulous precision, recording the movements of planets and stars on clay tablets. If Daniel had passed down this prophecy, a star signaling a Jewish king, they would have been watching, waiting, for generations. Now let me fast forward to around 6 BC. Something appears in the night sky. Something significant enough to make these Persian scholars pack their bags, gather expensive gifts, and embark on a journey of perhaps 1,000 miles. When they arrive in Jerusalem, Matthew 2 verse 3 tells us that Herod was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. That word disturbed, in Greek, it's tarasso. It means troubled, agitated, thrown into confusion. Why would a king be troubled by some foreign visitors asking about a baby? Here's what I find fascinating. The Magi weren't just scholars. In the Persian Empire, they were kingmakers. They held the power to crown and uncrown rulers. When a delegation of Parthian kingmakers shows up in Roman-controlled Jerusalem asking about a newborn king of the Jews, that's not a religious curiosity. That's a political threat. Herod was a puppet king installed by Rome. His throne was never secure. And now foreign power brokers from Rome's greatest rival are in his city, acknowledging a different king. No wonder all Jerusalem was troubled with him. Here's what strikes me most about this story. The first people recorded in Matthew's Gospel to worship Jesus weren't Jewish priests. They weren't scribes or Pharisees. They weren't even from Israel. They were Gentiles, foreigners, pagans by Jewish standards. Matthew 2 verse 11 tells us that when the Magi found Jesus, they bowed down and worshipped him. The Greek word there is proskuneo, the same word used for worshiping God. These Persian priests, raised in Zoroastrian traditions, recognized in this Jewish child someone worthy of divine honor. I find that remarkable. The religious establishment in Jerusalem, the people who had the scriptures, who knew the prophecies, who should have been watching, they missed it. When Herod asked the chief priests where the Messiah would be born, they knew the answer immediately. Bethlehem. Micah 5 verse 2. They had the information, but they didn't go. The Magi went. They traveled 1,000 miles. They brought treasures. They fell on their faces before a toddler in an ordinary house in an unremarkable town. And I think Matthew is making a point. From the very beginning of Jesus' story, God was signaling that this wasn't just for Israel. This was for everyone. The prophet Isaiah had written centuries earlier that the Messiah would be a light for the Gentiles. Isaiah 42 verse 6. The Magi were the first glimpse of that promise fulfilled. Foreign seekers, following a star, finding the king. Now, about those gifts they brought. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We mention them every Christmas. But have you ever wondered why those three? They weren't random. Each one carried a message, a prophetic declaration about who this child would become. In our next episode, I'm going to unwrap those gifts with you. What they meant, where they came from, and why they might just be the most significant presents ever given. I'll see you then.